Today's episode of The Majority Report is brought to you by Season 2 of the podcast Blowback. It's exclusively available on Stitcher Premium. After a critically acclaimed retelling of the Iraq War, Season 2 of Blowback, co-hosted by Brendan James and Noah Colwyn. Brendan was on this program previewing Season 1 back in the day. Is a 10-part account of the unlikely story of the Cuban Revolution. It's a nuclear-tipped showdown between the Kennedy brothers, Fidel Castro, the Soviet Union, the CIA, and the Mafia. To listen now, get a free month of Stitcher Premium. Go to Stitcher.com/premium and enter the promo code MAJORITY when you select a monthly plan. That's Stitcher.com/premium, promo code MAJORITY. Now, let's start this show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, April 19th, 2021. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Joshua Rothman, professor of history, University of Alabama, on the ledger and the chain, how domestic slave traders shaped America. Meanwhile, Joe Biden, pressured to raise the refugee cap, will raise it by less than 1/4 of his campaign pledge. Now, with 3 million COVID deaths worldwide, over 50% of Americans have had at least their first vaccination. I should say American adults. Senate Democrats seem to be settling on a 25% corporate tax rate. And speaking of President Manchin, he has just come out and co-sponsored the PRO Act. That leaves 3 senators yet to co-sponsor the PRO Act, which is a threshold for it to be brought in the Senate. And while Marjorie Greene Taylor cancels her America First Nativist Caucus.
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Whatever.
Okay.
Marjorie Taylor Greene. The Derek Chauvin trial closing arguments begin and end today. The program Save Our Stages has sat on $16 billion for almost 4 months. Meanwhile, Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland reverses a ton of Trump anti-environmental deregulations and creates a climate task force. And a supposed self-driving Tesla car ends up killing its 2 occupants. And lastly, this just breaking, the United Mine Workers have come out in favor of a just transition program away from mining coal. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Glad you could make it on this Monday, this very spring-like Monday.
It's beautiful
today.
out.
Emma Vigeland is here wearing a spring.
Sure. It's a spring shirt. It's very light. Like, I was hot walking to work, but now I'm cold again.
There you go.
So it's that kind of year when you can't decide, but I had a jacket on, you know.
That time of year, yes.
Important stuff.
Indeed. And I'm wearing, of course, I'm in my spring garb as well, as you can see, which is very similar to my winter and my my fall outfit. But wait till summer comes, folks.
It's going to be a polo shirt, huh?
No, it's going to be a shirt like this, except for short sleeve.
Oh, okay. Casual Friday is when the polos.
Yeah, no,
come
it's still going to be a hardish cover. Not exactly, but there it is. So a couple of things. This was just late breaking. The United Mine Workers of America are coming out in favor of a just transition program. This is from the New York Times. The country's largest mine workers union signaled on Monday that it would accept a transition away from fossil fuels in exchange for new jobs in renewable energy, spending on technology to make coal cleaner, and financial aid for miners who lose their jobs. This is a big part of the Green New Deal, frankly. The Mine Workers Plan, which is going to be presented at an event with the Senator Joe Manchin, calls for the creation of new jobs in Appalachia through tax credits that would subsidize the making of solar panel and wind turbine components by funding the reclamation of abandoned mines that pose a risk to public health. That is good stuff. And so almost simultaneously, Joe Manchin signed on to the PRO Act as a co-sponsor.
Just minutes ago.
Yeah,
honestly.
and I don't know if that was necessarily like tremendously unexpected, but he had been holding out. And now we have three: Kristen Sinema, Mark Kelly, and Mark Warner, who is sort of like skirts under the radar. With
Yeah,
this stuff.
I talk about how he's kind of just the dark horse of the centrist opposition to anything leftist. I mean, he represents a lot of the industries that are even more nefarious than Joe Manchin, who's more engaged in a personal branding exercise, as you put it, than Mark Warner, who is, I think, even more beholden to specific moneyed interests.
Yeah, I mean, it would appear so. And certainly Warner and Kelly got big money from Amazon, who we just saw a perfect example of how a company like Amazon or Amazon can expend millions upon millions of dollars to prevent the unionization of its workers. One story in the BBC about a woman who had cancer was told by Amazon, if you get a union, we're taking away your health care. And she, of course, didn't vote for the union. We recounted last week with the help of Rich Yaselson that they expanded the size of the unit. They got to dictate what the unit was as to what the union would organize.
Got it.
And so the PRO Act wouldn't necessarily have gotten you a union in Bessemer, but it would have made it much easier to unionize. And so it's when you look at a guy like Mark Warner or Mark Kelly, for that matter, you got to wonder, they got all that money from Amazon. Does that impact their vote when it comes to making it easier for workers to unionize in this country?
I think the answer might be yes.
It might be. It could also just be that, like, well, they were determined not to do it and they get that money anyways. And then the question is how much is that money worth relative to the pressure that they're going to get to vote the other way? So, but it's important you know that if that's one of your senators or if it's just someone that you didn't understand who they were, essentially. We should also say that the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union filed objections to the election with the National Labor Relations Board. And we will see how the National Labor Relations Board rules on these various objections. Don't know what the specific ones were, but I imagine the drop box that was put on Amazon property, contrary to the ruling by the National Labor Relations Board, is going to be one of those things. Maybe things like telling, a cancer patient that they're not going to have health insurance. Who knows? But we'll get more on that as it comes in. Mentioned earlier that both the defense and the prosecution are going to rest today in their final arguments in the Derek Chauvin case. Some of the images that maybe you saw of like cops surrounding a church where there were protests in Brooklyn Center over the Dante Wright killing were really disturbing. And I don't know when we'll get a Derek Chauvin ruling, verdict, but I imagine it could be sometime this week. But of all the people weighing in on the various killings of unarmed black men, and in one instance, I think, I don't know if they had commented on this, a teenager, a boy. Here is Pat Robertson of the what's his show again? I can't
700 Club.
700 Club.
It's inexplicably still on air.
Yep.
He is broadcasting still.
Yeah, God bless him. They're going to literally wheel him off that set.
Also, I'm going to say, I think a lot of people are thinking like I was, that both the gun and the taser would be put on your dominant side, but it's not that way.
Yeah, but they have to cross where they have them different.
So you actually have to reach across yourself to
you
get
feel the
taser.
difference. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's definitely
there's just no
discernible.
comparison. As I say, they're not making tasers in this yellow color anymore. They're making in black. They're making them yellow. Now, how she made the
Insane
difference when
image.
she shot that poor guy to death, saying, "This is what I thought. I thought was my taser." And if you can't tell the difference in the feel of those things, it's crazy. Anyhow, she deserves. But I am pro-police, folks. I think we need the police. We need their servants, and they do a good job. But if they don't stop this onslaught, they cannot do this. The police in Virginia picked up a lieutenant in the Army and began to give him trouble. And our state police are highly trained. But why they don't stop this? And this thing is going on in Minnesota, but the Derek Chauvin, they ought to put him under the jail. He has caused so much trouble by kneeling on the death of George Floyd. It's just, on his neck. It's just terrible what's happening. And the police, why don't they open their eyes to what the public relations are? They've got to stop this stuff.
Maybe they need more training.
Yeah, maybe more training. But the public relations seems to be his concern as he trails off. But the initial prop usage was to demonstrate how the weight, the feel, the grip, the different sides where they're holstered, it's entirely different. And an officer who's been in the force for over, 25 years, as she was, should be able to tell the difference. And if you've lost Pat Robertson on this issue, come on. It's got to be, something's got to give at some point.
Yeah, and I would say, look, there's two things about this clip. One is Pat Robertson, I think, maybe in that position now where he can sort of like almost see the pearly gates and realizes like, oh, wait a second, I may be taking a trip down instead of up. I may have
a legacy, yeah.
And so I might need to sort of build some points and extra credits before before I get into some type of judgment situation. But the what they inadvertently, I think, point out is that like you have all of these factors that that would have prevented the cop from doing what she did, which is you got to reach across your body, that it's made out of yellow, that it feels different, that undoubtedly after 20 years, she's had a lot of training at this. The problem is one of two things, or maybe both things. One is there is no amount of training that ultimately is going to prevent this. The human humans are not capable of engaging in what they engage in, these police officers apparently, regardless of the type of training. If you give them all these weapons, and on top of that, you give them a sense that when they see black people, they are necessarily in like some type of heightened state that they are looking at, a potential enemy. And, we've had many people, military personnel calling in going like, we don't have rules of engagement like that when we're at war. We're not allowed to fire at people unless they're actively firing at us. We're just not allowed to. And so the bottom line is like, you need to have a structural difference. You need to not put police officers in this situation, not necessarily for their sake, but not necessarily not for their sake. You need to just say like, no more traffic stops by armed officers. There's no more opportunity for you to get arrested because your light is out on your car or your registration sticker is whatever. We're no longer using this as an opportunity, as like some massive fishing net that supposedly is keeping society safe, because there's no evidence that it keeps society safe. There's a lot of evidence that ends up with a lot of dead people, innocent people, or people, who shouldn't be dead.
Yeah, and you heard at the end, the co-host suggests maybe they need more training. Okay, so this is a right-wing show. That is the right-wing position. So when you hear Joe Biden or anybody else in the Democratic Party suggest more training, understand that that's wildly insufficient. Structural changes are exactly what Sam's talking about. Changing.
She was a trainer.
Policing.
She was a trainer.
Right. She was training officers at the time she did this, and she still didn't know the difference between her taser and her gun.
Right. And so, look, it's just, we have to continually narrow the scope of the responsibilities of police officers, period. And that's it. All right, we got to take a break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Joshua D. Rothman. He is the professor of history and the chairman of the history department at the University of Alabama, author of The Ledger and the Chain, How Domestic Slave Traders Shaped America. We'll be right back after this. And, this is, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about this. One of our sponsors today is Brooklinen. And this is exciting for them. It's springtime, right? World is still a little bit sideways, but spring, we have this idea of starting anew, right? Well, here's where Brooklinen comes in. Brooklinen is having a birthday sale, and it's happening this weekend. Brooklinen is offering site-wide savings on all things comfort for their biggest sale of the year. The reason why I saw this and I was a little bit off put was just, I literally just bought a new set of the core sheets.
Oh, you missed the. I'm
going to go back though, because I'm like, you can't have too many sheets as far as I'm concerned. But I bought. They had like limited edition red stripe. All my sheets are striped.
Yes, you are pro stripe.
I'm pro stripe, and I got the red stripe ones, and I got the. I decided to like go with new pillows. For years, I've been using pillows that are like hard as a rock. I've actually had people who stayed over who laughed at me because of the pillows.
Or just said that they had a bad sleep because of
No, they just like, what human being has pillows like this? And then I don't know why. I've come around. I've gotten new pillows. I got new pillows from Brooklyn. And why? Because working directly with the manufacturers, Brooklyn ensures premium, high-quality comfort every time at a fraction of the retail price. Brooklyn has ridiculously soft bedding, fantastic towels, and they have loungewear. They're so confident you're going to love everything. They have a 365-day warranty, and they've got 75,000 five-star reviews and counting. Very hard to argue with that, but don't listen to any of those reviews, folks, because I can tell you definitively, the bedding is tremendous. Pillows, sheets, towels have not got the loungewear. I have not because I just don't lounge.
Well, I want to purchase that loungewear because
it looks good,
I'm
but I'm
a sucker for it.
I don't lounge. But I can tell you, all my betting has now been Brooklyn. It's been Brooklyn for a long time, but now I'm starting to like getting into a couple of different colors on the betting.
Hey.
Yep. You get everything you need for a spring refresh during Brooklinen's biggest sale of the year. Shop Brooklinen birthday sale starting this weekend. And if you're listening to this podcast after the sale ends, don't worry. You can still go to brooklinen.com and use the promo code Majority Report to get $20 off any purchase of $100 or more. Wow, that's awesome. That's Brooklinen, BROOKLINEN.com. Enter promo code Majority Report to get $20 off any purchase of $100 or more. Brooklinen, everything you need to live your most comfortable life. All right, I'd like to welcome to the show Joshua D. Rothman. He is the professor of history at the University of Alabama, author of his most recent, The Ledger and the Chain, How Domestic Slave Traders Shaped America. Professor, I'm here with Emma Vigeland. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
So let's start with 1808.
Okay.
This is when the United States banned the transcontinental slave trade, or the transatlantic, I guess I should say. What was behind that, and then what sort of dynamic did it create in this country that left it ripe for your protagonists?
Sure. So, the transatlantic slave trade had gone on for several centuries by the time you get to the end of the 18th century. And in the Constitution, they make a provision that said Congress would not do anything about the transatlantic slave trade for 20 years after ratification. Everybody pretty much knew that after that 20 years expired, a ban would probably come into play. And the reasons for that are sort of complicated. In some measure, there's moral opposition to the transatlantic trade, but there are also these complicated economic and political considerations involved. Economically, for example, most states had actually either restricted or banned the transatlantic trade long before 1808. It was something that people thought had kind of outlived its usefulness. It was something that states of the Upper South realized that if there were no more imports of enslaved people, then they would be able to sell enslaved people who they were already in the country. And so when the ban comes down in 1808, it's put in place at a time when people thought slavery might be losing momentum in the United States. But between 1788 and 1808, you get the invention of the cotton gin, you get the expansion of the nation into the West, you get the Louisiana Purchase. All of a sudden, cotton is the significantly much more profitable crop than people thought it was going to be in the 1780s. And so what Congress does is they institute the ban in 1808. But by doing that, of course, they effectively create a protective market for slave sales domestically. And so that creates opportunities for really a slave trade industry to develop domestically.
I had meant to, I had contemplated this as I was reading through some of your work that, maybe I need to just tell people this is going to be sort of a disturbing conversation in some respects, because honestly, like some of and particularly when we get into when some of these slave traders that you write about are talking about women, like the point of what you've written is to show how sort of brutal these slave traders and dehumanizing so we're going to be talking about enslaved people as just like pure commodities here. And I mean, I guess that is the point. So so with that said, and that sort of limit on how many enslaved people are going to be in the country at that point, which almost necessarily means like, okay, there's a finite amount of enslaved people, their value starts to rise once the demand starts to kick up with cotton. When we look back on this era, before we go forward, what are the myths that you that in many respects, I think you wrote this to dispel?
So, there are a lot of myths about the domestic slave trade and about slave traders that have really carried on since starting really before the Civil War. They really kick in even afterward they become sort of part of the mythology of the lost cause. I think there are probably several big myths that are worth dispelling. One is simply the scale of the domestic trade. One of the things that white Southerners often said before the Civil War was that slave sales were rare. They were something that slaveholders really only turned to as a last resort, reluctantly, when they had no other choice. If you actually look at the domestic slave trade, it's simply not true. I mean, it's just a lie. Slave sales happened all the time in the United States. They don't simply happen when slaveholders feel like they have no choice. They happen when slaveholders feel like they have different kinds of calculations they're making about their labor force, about their finances. Enslaved families are separated routinely. Somebody did a calculation on this in the 70s and calculated that essentially one enslaved person was sold somewhere in the United States every 3.5 minutes for decades. So that's one myth, is that the slave trade was something sort of off to the side and kind of uncommon. A second important one, I think, has to do with slave traders themselves. And this was something that white slaveholders said all the time, which was that, sure, the slave trade does happen sometimes, but that the people who are really responsible for that are the traders. Traders are sort of these low lifes, kind of the dregs of humanity. Nobody really likes dealing with them. And if you had to deal with them, you would certainly only do it in a business setting. You would never socialize with a slave trader. The idea was that they were sort of a necessary evil, right? Kind of social outcasts. But if you actually look at slave traders and at their status in the United States, again, that simply doesn't seem to be true. It's easy to say that you disdained people who were kind of fly-by-night operators, right? They might show up somewhere with people to sell. You never knew where they came from. And when they sold people, then they disappeared. You never knew where they were. But a lot of slave traders are not like that. They're not necessarily itinerants. They're established business people in cities and towns all over the country. They are respected business people. They have relationships with politicians and merchants and banks and slaveholders. They, even after they get out of the trade, they marry into respectable families. They run for public office. They sometimes go into other businesses. So they might run, they might run hotels or get involved with banks themselves, things like that. So really the idea that the slave trade and that slave traders are somehow, they're kind of not really part of what made slavery and what made the American economy worked. If you actually look at the evidence, those things simply aren't true.
But there seems to be such a cognitive dissonance there. I mean, to put it mildly, like there's no moral difference to me looking at it now between owning slaves and participating in slave trading. How is that separated in people's minds during this time, and why was one seen more unseemly than the other? Was it just because owning slaves was so integral to the United States economy?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And there is some cognitive dissonance there. And it was, and you're right. I mean, in some ways, I think what you need to realize is that essentially every slave owner at some point is a slave trader. Almost every slaveholder at some point is going to engage in the buying and selling of enslaved people. So, we look at it today and we say, well, what's really the difference, right? The slave trade is not only something that happens because slave traders do it, it happens because it's everywhere. And that is certainly true. But part of the mythology is slaveholders telling themselves that their involvement in slavery was really about paternalism. There's a mythology of paternalism that infuses ideas about slaveholding, where slaveholders could tell themselves that, that by owning enslaved people, they were sort of improving their situations. They were making better Christians out of them, that they took care of them. They made sure that their families were not separated in the market. Again, the cognitive dissonance is a way of displacing what they told themselves were the worst elements of slavery onto a different class of people. But in fact, you're absolutely right. If you actually look at the way slavery operated, there's no sort of good side of slavery and bad side of slavery. There's just slavery. And the worst elements of slavery were always there. They're omnipresent in enslaved people's lives. But this was a story that slaveholders told themselves, and the ideas that they advanced about what the slave trade were part of that story.
It's almost as if they want to play it off like, I've just adopted somebody. And, they're just now, I'm their guardian now, as opposed to I've purchased this person. And if it suits me in the marketplace, I'll go back in and sell it at a profit.
I mean, there's really a way in which they're trying to tell themselves that slavery is not nearly as profit oriented and nakedly exploitative as it actually is.
All right, so let's go to some of the characters that you focus on to tell this story. And I should also say too that I learned that by 1863, I think it was, or just right before the Civil War, the value of enslaved people was greater than the nation's investment in railroads, banks, and manufacturing put together.
Put together, yeah, that's true.
That when we talk about the questions of infrastructure today, when we talk about the bill, the idea that people could be part of infrastructure. That's what the first 100 years of our country was, just exclusively. It seems like the biggest element of our infrastructure, of our economy, was enslaved people.
Enslaved people are an enormous asset class before the Civil War. I mean, it really, and like you said before, it is disturbing and really troubling to even think about people in those terms, nonetheless talk about them in those terms. But that, enslaved people, we often think of them as, to the extent we think about slavery and enslaved people, what their function was in American society, we think of them as a labor force. It's not simply as a labor force. They are obviously a labor force that creates, that is producing cotton, which is the largest export the United States had before the Civil War. But they're also an investment for lots of people. They could be mortgaged, they could be leveraged. They could be sort of the underpinning of state bonds for banks, and so they are financialized as well. And yes, and simply the financial value is enormous in addition to the labor value.
So let's start with Austin Woolfolk in Baltimore. Who was he, and what part does he play in this story?
So Austin Woolfolk is in some ways sort of the pioneer for what the people that I really write about would then do. Austin Woolfolk was a slave trader based in Baltimore. He is particularly active in the late 18-teens and into the 1820s. And he and a number of brothers and cousins, these businesses were often family operations, as a lot of businesses were in the early republic. And he is really one of the first traders to create a big business by shipping people by boat along the coast from the upper South to the lower South. So he is sending hundreds of people at a time from Baltimore, first to Georgia, then over to New Orleans. He has a regular office set up in Baltimore. He is really sort of the leading slave trader in the United States in the 1820s. If you read some of the autobiographical stuff of Frederick Douglass talked about how, Frederick Douglass was born and raised in Maryland, and really talked about how Austin Woolfolk was the kind of person who really was a terror to enslaved people everywhere in Maryland, whether they actually came across him or not. They always knew that the prospect of being sold to Austin Woolfolk was a possibility.
And then, Woolfolk ended up being, was he a direct inspiration? So when we get into talking about Isaac Franklin and John Armfield and Rice Ballard, did they see what Woolfolk was doing and saying, we can innovate in this area, essentially?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So Franklin and Armfield, when they kind of get into the slave trade at different points in time and different points in their lives, but they are really starting to get involved in Northern Virginia, particularly in the city of Alexandria. And you couldn't avoid Austin Woolfolk in those places. Everybody knew that he was the major player in the region. And when you see as they start to develop their business, it's very clear that the kind of model that they are working from is the model that Austin Woolfolk had pioneered. Now, there's no actual sort of letter that survived where they say, we're gonna do what Woolfolk did, but we're gonna do it bigger and better. But that really is effectively what they did. If you take a look at the way that they designed their business model, it really is taking a lot of the techniques that Woolfolk did and making them even larger, making them even more expansive. For example, they don't go into Baltimore at the very beginning because they realized that trying to compete head to head with him was impossible. So they try to set up a kind of parallel business in Northern Virginia. And then eventually that business gets so big that they actually pretty much put Woolfolk out of business.
So what were some of their I guess innovations? I mean, what did they do? They started to go. I mean, they realized that there was a trade here. It sounds like to a certain extent that they said we can develop the market as opposed to just sort of serve it.
Yeah, so a number of things that they do, and again, a few of these things are things that Woolfolk did, right? One thing they do, for example, is they establish a headquarters, a kind of regular office. A lot of slave traders before Austin Woolfolk, and then even continuing past the Woolfolk era, these were men who worked out of taverns, bars, hotels. They don't have a kind of regular place of business. The taverns and hotels were the kinds of places where people did all sorts of business. So they set up shop there. Woolfolk had had offices in a house, and he had a private jail that was connected to the house. And so Franklin and Armfield basically do the same thing. They rent this 3-story townhouse in Alexandria. It's attached to an enormous compound out in the back where you could put several hundred enslaved people at a time. Franklin has the sales end of the business down in Natchez, Mississippi, and then in New Orleans. Eventually, they're running sales out of both cities. So that's one thing they do is they create an official headquarters, right? So you knew that this wasn't a fly-by-night operation. This was really a kind of regular place of business with regular businessmen. Another thing they do is they expand on the shipping element of things. We often think of the domestic slave trade as working mostly over land. Everybody's sort of seen images of people being walked in long lines, in handcuffs, in these caravans that were known as coffles. Franklin and Armfield did do that sometimes, but what Woolfolk really demonstrated was you could, if you were willing to pay a little more up front, you could cut the time involved of getting people from the upper South to the lower South in half, maybe even more than in half, if you send people by ship instead. And so Franklin and Armfield do that. And not only do they send people by ship, eventually they buy their own ships. They have a small fleet of company vessels that they use. And at the peak of their business, they have a ship at sea somewhere almost every single day. They are sending loads of people at the peak, basically every 2 weeks. A shipment of people was leaving Alexandria for New Orleans. So that's a second thing that they do. But really what makes them kind of most successful, and that really is able to kind of put them at the top of their industry, is, Isaac Franklin had been working in the slave trade practically since 1808. So by the time Franklin and Armfield is founded in 1828, he's been in the business for 20 years. He's developed all kinds of relationships with merchants and with bankers in the lower South. And what he realizes is that if you were willing to run your business more on credit than on cash, because most slave traders, it's a cash business. Franklin liked cash. All slave traders liked cash. But he realized that if he could tap into credit lines from banks and have a lot of money at his disposal, then he could afford also to sell enslaved people on credit more than most slave traders did. And a lot of slaveholders and prospective customers, they love being able to buy out credit. They love being able to have the person in their custody and then pay them off over time. So what Franklin and Armfield are able to do is they're able to make their business so big, not simply because they had so much cash on hand, but because they have access to enormous amounts of credit that they have flowing at any given time. And so they've got this kind of constant motion of money for enslaved people. And being tapped into those networks really better than anyone else is really what sets them apart and makes them so successful.
Are these innovations specific to, I mean, and they, are these innovations, and you know, they've turned slaves into essentially like, machines that you would buy, machinery, right? I mean, that's the way that, manufacturers will buy machinery is I'll buy it on a loan and I'll pay it off over, as to what the machines produce, essentially. Was this new to slavery, or was it simply like also a financial innovation that was sort of new to the world of capitalism, right? I mean, like this is the we're watching almost on some level too, the development of capitalism here.
Yeah, I mean, look, what Franklin and Armfield are doing, right? I wouldn't say that slave traders and people like Franklin and Armfield are pioneering the idea of the way their credit operations run, right? This is something that's parallel in a lot of industries across the United States and really across the Western world as part of the early industrial revolution and the way businesses are running. But it's the application of it to slavery and the trade in enslaved people. That's what's really different about Franklin and Armfield in particular. And obviously, they're not the only slave traders who do this. They weren't even necessarily the first slave traders to do it. They're just people who do it a lot better than anyone else of their era.
What banks, and are some of these banks still in existence today, were most kind of integral to this credit system with slave traders? Because, a lot of this is whitewashed from the history of institutions like, say, J.P. Morgan Chase or whatever. I'm not sure when that came into existence, but
I actually have not traced the genealogy of the banks that they worked with and tried to figure out. None of them have survived directly. Right. You won't find any names of any of the banks they work with and say this is the exact same bank then as it is now. Banks come and go, particularly in the era they worked in the 1830s. There's a lot of enormous amounts of money flooding into the banking sector in the United States, which also contributes to why they're so successful. Right. There's a timing issue here. Economic panics and depressions come around that wipe banks out, and so banks could kind of come and go in this era. Probably the most famous bank that they worked with, though, is the Second Bank of the United States. It's the bank that holds all the money of the federal government, and essentially what you have going on there is, the money of the federal government before the Civil War mostly comes from a couple of places. It comes from customs, or it comes from selling Indian land. So basically, the process that's happening here is the federal government is displacing and dispossessing Indian nations in the Southeast. They're turning around and selling that land to white cotton farmers and pulling the money into the federal treasury. And then they're putting that money into investments, especially in the South and Southwest, which then goes to buy enslaved people. So it's this cycle where the way in which that sector of the economy is predicated on these kind of multiple levels of exploitation and expropriation. It's kind of remarkable when you sort of lay it out like that, because it's the complexities of money are very complicated, but the actual sort of process of what's going on here, when you boil it down to it, it's pretty straightforward, and it's pretty awful.
Awful. Just to sort of like, I just want to examine that cycle a little bit, and also, sort of set the context in terms of timing, right? You have Jackson is clearing clearing. I mean, he's killing Native Americans, basically, like you say, dispossessing them of that land. So that's function A of the U.S. government in sort of like creating this cycle, I guess, or this sort of this system, which then allows for cotton to be grown there, and then they finance the mechanism to do the slave trade, which is going to provide the labor to pick that cotton. So we have sort of like multiple subsidies of this whole process going through this, that the American government is just sort of making it work. And this dynamic on some level is also like, it's the same dynamic of imperialism on some level, right? I mean, just broadly speaking, we're doing that. We just happen to be doing it domestically, or considering it domestic because it's contiguous to land that we're taking from other people anyways.
Yeah, sure. And this really is part of the expansion of an American empire, right? It happens first with Louisiana Purchase, then it continues to happen in the War of 1812, then it continues to happen in the Age of Jackson. And of course, following the Age of Jackson, then it happens in Texas, right? And you get the Mexican War, and that is sort of the kind of the next stage of American imperialism. And the truth is that by the time you got to the 1850s, you had a sizable number of Southern slaveholders and Southern politicians who really imagine a kind of hemispheric empire of slavery. They have their eyes particularly on places like Cuba as places that might be taken and attached to the United States. They imagine that there could be places in Central and South America where slavery could continue to expand. So what you're seeing here in the 1820s and 1830s is not the first stage of the process, but it is one stage of this process of the growth of an American empire. Absolutely.
And let's talk just a little bit about the process of building, because now we have a finite number of enslaved people in the country, except for as people are being born into slavery, I guess, as well. And maybe you can help us with, what kind of numbers that is in terms of building the enslaved population. But these guys, Franklin and Armfield, also go around and essentially purchase slaves, and then there's some type of arbitrage that goes on. It's almost like house flipping on some level. They warehouse the slaves. They literally fatten them up. Will you talk about that process of like how they sort of get their slaves ready to be sold after, and how they find them?
Sure. So, like I said, John Armfield has this townhouse as a headquarters that he's got in Alexandria, but of course he can't be in all places at once, right? He is sometimes, in his offices in Alexandria. Sometimes he is out in town or elsewhere in the District of Columbia. And bear in mind that the city of Alexandria at this point is part of the District of Columbia, right? So this is also part of the reason they draw so much attention, is they are right in the nation's capital, right across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. And in order to kind of maximize the number of enslaved people the company can purchase, they have agents, basically sort of employees of the firm who are often working on commission, and they are scattered out across Maryland and Northern Virginia. Eventually they're in Baltimore, they're up and down the eastern shore of Maryland, they're out in the city of Frederick, they're in the city of Warrenton, Virginia. They station Rice Ballard in the city of Richmond, and Richmond is becoming itself a really important node for the domestic slave trade by the 1830s, and becomes even more so later in the era. And essentially what they're doing, you can imagine kind of Armfield and Alexandria as sort of the center of a circle. Kind of the way I describe it in the book is they're sort of spokes on a wheel. And all of these agents are funneling people to Alexandria. Armfield will, as you say, sort of stockpile people in the compound in Alexandria. He will then put them on a boat when he has enough people and the time is right. The ship will then sail down the Potomac from Alexandria out into the Chesapeake Bay. It will stop in Norfolk, where Ballard is sending people from Richmond down the James River to Norfolk. So they'll load more people in Norfolk. When the boat is full, they then send it down the Atlantic coast, around Florida, up into the Gulf of Mexico to New Orleans. Franklin will then pick people up in New Orleans. Some people he's selling in New Orleans, other people he's putting on a steamboat and sending up to Natchez, Mississippi, which is sort of is on the Mississippi River and is really a kind of major hub of the cotton trade in Mississippi, and really in Mississippi, Eastern Louisiana as well. And then once you get people to Natchez, right, by this point, this is a trip that's taken about 3 weeks to get from Alexandria to New Orleans. It's the standard voyage is 19 days, but it could take a little bit longer than that. It's about 3 weeks. You're on this boat. By night, you are locked below decks like you would be in the transatlantic slave trade. By day, you're often sort of led out onto the deck. But nonetheless, by the time you get there, you're exhausted. You've been wearing the same clothes for 3 weeks. You're filthy. The kind of rations that you're going to get aboard a ship, I mean, even under the best of conditions, are not going to be great. So what would happen then is Franklin would receive the people that Armfield had sent him. He would make sure that they got themselves cleaned up. Armfield always sent new clothing from Alexandria. They have a tailor shop in Alexandria where they actually make the clothing. So they're given new clothing. They're given some decent food. They're cleaned up, and they're basically made to look as healthy and as strong as possible. So that when customers came, they believed that they could kind of project what they would be getting when they purchased a particular person. And sometimes that means somebody is marketed as field labor. Sometimes it's marketing people with particular skills, right? They'd say this person is a cook, this person is a blacksmith, this person is a carpenter, and you can sell people for a premium that way. And basically Franklin and Armfield are kind of making their difference, making their money on the difference between what they could purchase people for and what they could sell people for. Added on top of that, of course, is any interest that Franklin would get if the people are being sold on credit. And his sort of standard interest rate was about 10% per year.
And we should say, like, they would use wax to fill in marks from being whipped. They would dye folks' hair, or
those were pretty standard practices in the slave trade. Yeah. Now whipping scars, really, there's only so much you can do to disguise that. But what Franklin would have to do is he'd have to know, okay, look, if I'm gonna sell this person, I have to be able to come up with some sort of life story to explain this, right? And you had to explain away sort of marks of torture like that. You really, there's only so much disguising of those sorts of things that you could do. But yes, things like dyeing people's hair and things like that, those were pretty standard practices.
So we don't have much time, but why do you think that this has been? And I could ask this question about Reconstruction, and I feel like we could ask this question about the lost cause as well. But why has this been this history so erased? I mean, these guys were effectively billionaires. They were the billionaires of their time. They didn't literally have $1 billion, but it would have been close, I think, in today's value. They were
I mean, hundreds of millions. If you sort of estimate their fortune relative to kind of what GDP is now, I mean, it would have been hundreds of millions. Yeah,
and they are completely, as you write, like immersed in high society. They're not ostracized in any way. Why is it so erased from history?
I think there are lots of complicated reasons for why that would be, but the shortest version of that of the answer to that question, I think, is because the myths have been very successful in taking hold, and it is related to the lost cause. The idea that that slavery maybe wasn't so bad as we thought it was. The idea that that slavery and capitalism were not as integrally connected as a lot of historians are coming to kind of re-examine. I mean, this is not new, right? Things about slavery and capitalism are things people have been talking about on and off for a century. There are historians looking at that in new ways in the last 10 or 15 years, but the idea itself is not new. But I think it's the kind of story that it doesn't flatter the nation. And Americans, and we are not the only people who do this, but I think Americans in particular really like stories that flatter the nation and flatter themselves. And you can't tell this story in a way that is flattering to the way the United States developed. And it's one of those things that is easier to bury than it is to deal with.
It's fascinating. These two primary figures you're talking about, Armfield and Franklin, have no, at least white descendants.
No direct white descendants. That's true.
So there's really, I mean, it's what of their relatives, and they had one. Did they have one direct black descendant?
So each of both Franklin and Armfield had at least one child with an enslaved woman that I know of. It's distinctly possible there are more. Rice Ballard had at least one, and probably more as well. I believe that Rice Ballard does have direct white descendants. I have not met them. I have met several of the descendants of sort of relatives of Franklin and Armfield. Armfield, for example, raised several of Isaac Franklin's nieces and nephews effectively as his own children. And some of their descendants are still alive, and I've met with them. And you know, you'd have to ask them how they feel about, you know, being on the receiving end of this sort of story.
Is the money there though? I mean, I'm curious as to what that money's doing now.
Yeah, the money is, you know, I haven't asked them, are you rich? That's not really the kind of thing that I've gotten into with them. I think really, you know, the money is in some way still there, probably in certain family fortunes. If you were able to sort of trace it down, it's probably still there in some places. But to me, what's really more interesting and more significant than what particular family fortunes did these activities endow, it's really that the money of the slave trade, you know, where is it now? It's everywhere now. All of those people who were bought and sold and used to produce cotton, all of the kind of ways in which their value as assets was leveraged for the larger good of hundreds of thousands of individual people and the nation as a whole, all of that money is still diffused throughout the American economy. We're still living on the other end of it now.
Joshua D. Rothman, professor of history, University of Alabama. The book is The Ledger and the Chain, How Domestic Slave Traders Shaped America. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
All right, going to take a quick break. We will put a link to that book at majority.fm. We'll be right back after this. All right, folks, that's about it for us today. Disturbing stuff, and we didn't even get into the some of the most disturbing stuff about the perspective those slave traders had in terms of essentially enslaved women that they would were raping, and the way that they would discuss them with other people. It was just nothing that is in some ways unsurprising, but the
justification,
you just don't hear much about it.
Yeah, you don't really hear, I guess, about the psychology behind it and how socially how they justified it to themselves within society. Yeah,
completely seamless in the way it was integrated into these societies. All right, folks, that's it for us today. For Emma and I, we will see you tomorrow. And for some of you, we will see you now.
That was new.
That's new.
Yeah.
I made it up.
Well done.
Thank you. That was my accomplishment for the day.
Not really, though.
Now I can go take a nap. No, we're heading into the fun half, ladies and gentlemen, wherein we will take your phone calls and your IMs, and we will go over some sound clips and audio and video clips and talk about different things. You can support this show by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you get the free show, free of commercials, and you keep the free show alive. And then you get some extra content afterwards, which is the fun half. So head over to jointhemajorityreport.com right now. Support this program, if you will. And if you cannot afford the fun half, but you want it, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. Have patience with us. Sometimes a couple of emails fall through the cracks. Sometimes it takes weeks upon weeks to get back to you. But if you haven't heard from us and you sent us an email, send us another one, majorityreporters@gmail.com, and put in the subject line, fun half, and we will get to you ASAP. Just put fun half. Don't put fun half ASAP. Just fun half. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. And the AM Quickie. If you can't catch this show during the day, check out the AM Quickie, amquickie.com. You get the news of the day in about 6-7 minutes, right in podcast form. You can also watch on YouTube, too, at Majority Report Audio. Yes, I know. There's a lot of people IMing me already about Demi Jor and his... he's on like some type of like book tour or something right now.
He knows how to write?
Well, like a book tour.
Sorry. Don't care.
He read one. He read
that's shocking.
He's on a book tour telling people they read it.
Doesn't read articles, but reads books.
Folks, don't forget to check out Nomi's show. She starts her week tomorrow, but plenty of good content to check out there from last week. YouTube.com/The Noma Keys Show or twitch.tv, _NomaKey_show. And Matt, what's happening in the Leckian media universe?
Yeah, well, per today's interview, people should check out the most recent Literary Hangover episode on William Byrd's diary for 1710. There's a little exchange that starts in May of 26, where he says, I said my prayers and ate milk and strawberries with Captain Posford for breakfast. He told me that a ship was arrived with Negroes and offered his service to fetch my wine from Williamsburg. 5 days later, in the evening, I took a walk and met the new Negroes, which Mr. Bland had bought for me to the number of 26 for 23 pounds apiece. The next day, in the evening, I did not walk because of my company. Robin Hicks asked me to pay 70 pounds for 2 Negroes, which he intended to buy of John Evans, which I agreed in hoping of gaining the trade. So you see, immediately turned into a commodity that he sells for profit. Just that's how it worked.
It's like, honestly, like, I mean, it's sort of, it's disgusting to talk about it in this way, but it basically was like, flip this house type of situation.
100%. Yep.
Really fascinating, gross, and important. I mean, this history completely submerged so that we can, maintain these myths that get deployed all the time.
It wasn't Thomas Jefferson riding around his plantation on his horse doing like Enlightenment experiments.
No. All right, folks, 646-257-3920 is the number. We will see you in the fun half.
If
First IM of the day. Sean Plasted. Sean P. Lasted? I don't know what it is. Sam, you're so boring. I feel like I'm in a coma. That itself is in another coma. If I had to choose between having a 5-minute conversation with you or making out with a pangolin who had a dry cough, I'd be like, well, F it. Which way's the zoo? I love the show and wanted to suggest fellow Massachusettsian, John Hodgman as a guest. He's very funny and has become quite the organizer of late. Yeah, you know what? We should have Hodgman on. I was going to, and I saw him pre-pandemic. I run into John occasionally, and then the pandemic hit, and I stopped thinking.
I'm familiar with him being funny. What's he doing on the organizing front?
I don't know. I haven't seen, there's some people who I see all the time on Twitter, and then there's some people I never see on Twitter, and I follow him on Twitter. I don't even know. I don't know.
Maybe he just doesn't tweet that much.
He might. I just don't know.
Probably a good choice.
Not to tweet?
Yeah.
It's never a bad choice to not tweet.
Right. That's right.
I'm starting to think this is the same person. Right is worst. Sam, you have the sex appeal of a pressure-treated 2x4. But ground contact, pressure-treated 2x4.
I was going to say, that's not an insult to Sam, I don't think.
Every single person who must suffer the displeasure of looking at your face probably thinks the same 3 words about you. Bitch slapped by life. Love the show. Wanted to ask you about your baseball coaching career. Do you wear a uniform? And if so, please post a photo in the name of comedy. Okay. I have my own personal uniform, but we do have a t-shirt and a hat and a matching mask.
Oh.
That they give us. The kids have a uniform. Saul went 2 for 3 again yesterday. It's the second straight week he's gone 2 for 3. In fact, he's now hitting 4 for 6.
You're leaving out the part that's most important about this, that you are the pitcher.
Well, I pitch on our team. I'm the assistant coach. I pitch to our team, not just to him.
I know, but perhaps some may accuse you of fudging your own pitch.
I said the same thing to Sam yesterday, and he's not worried. I'm more worried about it from Saul's perspective, because kids are going to catch on at some point if he keeps going 2 for 3 every day.
Sounds valor. You get the first RBI on the team.
Hey, that's you with the with the cheating.
Whoa! All right.
Gotta.
But I do wear. I think there might be a picture of Saul and I on there.
What color is the team?
Blue.
Blue.
Yep.
I don't know. As a kid who's had a dad coach, my dad used to go a little bit harder at me than he did at the other kids. So I'm with Saul.
Oh, I do.
Yeah.
I do a little bit. You're not supposed to play favorites, and. Yeah, he doesn't. I don't. I when I played Little League, I had a, which was not the minor league. Although minor league, I guess the same dynamic. But Little League, my coach in Little League, was sort of famous for being a hard ass. And I used to catch, so I was always standing next to him. And I must have been like, I don't know, 12 or something like that. I can't remember. And Billy Gibbons, his son, Billy Gibbons Jr., was a coach for Holy Cross basketball.
Wow.
Maybe an assistant
I
coach.
screamed a little.
And yeah, well, it's not nothing. And he had a kid on the team, and Billy Sr. used to hit fungos out to the thing. That is like a long, thin bat that makes it easier to sort of, I guess, like sort of direct where you're hitting it, and it's not too hard. And his son played first base, and he's walking across the field. And Billy didn't seem to think anything of it. Just bang. Bounces off his kid's head. And his kid goes down. And he just starts yelling like, Judas H. Priest. Get the hell off the field, Tommy. God, Judas H. No, he wouldn't say God. He would just say all these like sort
Gosh. Yeah.
Not gosh. It would be like
close.
Ricky Dink AC out there. And he was very like, I was just like, holy crap.
So he blamed his kid for him hitting him in the back of the head with a ball.
His head got in the way of the ball.
Right.
Get off the field. Cross right in front there. It was pretty bad.
Seems like he was reliving some fantasies of his own.
There was some bad stuff. Frankly stunning Gobsentiva apple biter. Emma, were you at TYT event where Dorr did a comedy set? As a viewer, it seemed like he bombed hard, which in retrospect is hilarious.
I was not. I haven't heard of such an event.
The crass rebuttal.
Oh, that thing. No, I wasn't there. I don't think I was employed yet. But it was also hard for me to go to things because I was in New York and all the stuff happened in LA.
The crass rebuttal, it really took this long for someone to get the idea that you don't teach coal miners to code and you teach them to install solar panels and windmills, ? Are we really this bad at marketing and messaging on the left? I can come up with this stuff all day. Hire me. I'm unemployed at the moment.
It's not just the messaging that it takes to get the union to come out for something like that.
Yeah, it's not a question. It's really just sort of like, all right, where's the future of this going to be? And do we have a workforce that is going to be able to make this transition? And et cetera, et cetera. Suffrage baguette. Anecdotally, among the people who don't pay that much attention to politics, one of the reasons they like Andrew Yang is because he's such a nice guy. How can we oppose him on the merits? I mean, he seems like a perfectly nice guy, except for, I mean, this is a guy who, and you can only go by what he said in these contexts as he starts to like draw out, he was attacking teachers unions. I mean, he's got a very, very strong sort of libertarian streak in him, I think, in many respects. His UBI, we have plenty of examples of UBI experiments, at the very least at this point, being done around the country that are not replacements for the social safety net. I look at Andrew Yang as sort of like Mike Bloomberg without the personal resources to do stuff in New York. Like, I am not a fan of Michael Bloomberg's, period. But if you talk to anybody who did business with the city, they would say like he would deploy his own money. And some of it would come back to him in some different various ways. He would deploy his own money to get things, to push things through. And
he'd also do that in order to like buy off specific New York City institutions for favors later.
I'm not saying that it was all altruistic, but from the perspective of someone who's like, I'm building the new library in Queens or whatever it is. These things didn't stall because whenever there was a thing, like all of a sudden, like $12 million would show up and it would just buy everything off. Andrew Yang has the same, sort of like disposition and hostility towards the public sector, but doesn't have the money that he's going to be able to deploy to. I think
it's less hostility and more like, I think, complete lack of interest.
He's staffed up by Liz Smith, who worked on the Cuomo with the IDC stuff, if memory serves, and with Bloomberg people.
Also, wasn't she a Buttigieg person?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Buttigieg's comms director, right? So that's what you're getting. Except I actually think Yang's probably to the right of Buttigieg.
H-Dub. Pat Robertson on the right side of this police murder only because the cop is a woman. No, but he said he was talking
about Chauvin, but like
he
from the
was also-
perspective of a PR situation.
Majority Report wardrobe coordinator. Based on what I see in their posts on social media, I find it hard to believe that cops know how to properly de-escalate hostile situations. They can't even de-escalate on Facebook. Militant apathy.
We have that clip of that woman with dementia too.
Oh, what's that one?
Oh my God, yeah, this is awful. This. Can we play?
I think we have that right.
What number is that?
It's not on the list.
Oh, it's not? Is it too disturbing?
It's pretty disturbing. It's basically just a woman is, I think, lost after leaving Walmart because she has dementia, and a cop like says, "Do you need me to arrest you?" And he like grabs her, and she falls down and ends up breaking bones. So it's kind of disturbing, yeah.
Basically left Walmart or something like that with, I guess, something like $14 in unpaid goods. And so that's what the whole reason behind the stop was, I believe.
Do we have that clip? We can play it.
Siren, stop. You just left Walmart. Do you need to be arrested right now? No. Okay. Let's stop. Come on. Come on.
I'm going home.
No, on the ground. Stay on the ground.
I'm going home. I'm going home.
On the ground. On the ground. On the ground. Bravo 242. After a short struggle, she is now detained. Come on. I am code 4.
Do that.
Why did you do that? I told you to stop. You don't get to act this way. Come on. Stay on the ground. All right, let's stand up. Why are you doing this, ma'am? All right, stand up.
I'm not doing anything.
Right now you're resisting, which is not gonna fly with me. And before that, you tried to steal from Walmart. And they caught you and took the stuff back. Stand up. Oh, boy.
I'm not going anywhere.
Why are you fighting with me? And why are you trying to slip the cuffs off?
I'm going home.
Stop.
I'm going home.
No, you're not. Are you finished? Are you finished? We don't play this game.
So she was accused of stealing $13.88 worth of items at Walmart, and she has dementia and was walking along the side of the road. I hope he feels like a real man. And he goes, she's been detained. Thank God, you know? Thank God that menace to society was detained. Good job protecting Walmart. As you dislocated her shoulder, fractured her wrist, hogtied her. June 26, 2020.
It's just sort of, it's shocking. It's so disturbing. And anyone who, anyone who knows anyone or, is related to anyone or, that is suffering from dementia, the idea that somebody could be off wandering, maybe lost, And, you're thinking like, oh, well, hopefully they'll be found by maybe a police officer or something. I mean, like, there's a problem with just the mentality of police officers in this country. And, it's just a matter of like roulette as to which one is going to show up there. I also noticed that like when he calls it in, and he tries to change the tone in his voice.
Well, he's narrating it for the goddamn body cam because he wants to make it as official as possible. Why he's
when he calls it
this woman to the ground.
He has like there's sort of a just carefree quality.
Yeah, it's like CB radio, like calling in from like a hunting, fort or something like that.
I think part of it is also that he's like afraid, like, I don't want to take any ribbing from the guys at the office about how I sounded like I was struggling with a 73-year-old woman who was like, 1/3 my body weight or something.
Sorry, go on that.
You can more readily imagine this becoming a joke in the precinct than something they take seriously and change their behavior by.
Absolutely. Oh, well, of course. Why are you doing this? He kept repeating that over and over again. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Why didn't you sit with her, call an ambulance? I mean, the presumption that this was some sort of criminal activity, as she is clearly confused. In the first 2 seconds, you can see that she's confused.
Well, the other thing is, too, is like, it's also quite clear, like, she is representing absolutely no threat to this guy.
None.
And if it is the case that someone could actually be of the opinion, like, you have no idea what cops go through, everybody could be possibly a threat, that is the best argument for not deploying police officers in any of these situations. Because if that woman represents a threat, a reasonable threat to that officer, if anybody believes that officer could have reasonably perceived that woman as being a threat to him, then you must necessarily advocate for a wholesale change in when we deploy police officers, because then there's no way for anybody to be safe.
But Sam, the other alternative would be that this woman would have walked away with stealing $13.88 from Walmart. And, as a society, that's what we're going to privilege over treating people with like respect and not breaking old women's arms.
Imagine a social worker there saying, okay, how about I get you home and where you are and I'll cover the $13.
Or, you know what? Let's get you home and see what the situation is. And maybe I can get the $13. Maybe I'll be able to get $18.
Right.
Walmart be able to make $5.
Well, that's key. I just can't get over the gaslighting of why are you making me do this to you?
Yeah, I know.
It's abuser rhetoric. That's what a domestic abuser would say to a woman that he's beating up, right? Is because of you disrespected me, you're making me do this to you. And that's the mentality of police in America because of how we've structured it.
Mark Monkey, as someone who used to work with dementia patients, that fall likely also made her dementia worse. Indeed, falls are catastrophic at that age. It's more than just the physical damage, but the mental trauma. This can't be affirmed. 1312.
It's a great point.
Yeah. Calling from a 917 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Alex from New York.
Alex from New York. What's on your mind?
Well, in light of Emma's birthday, I figured I might as well have another matchup for you.
Hard to hear. Can you? Thank you for this. But can you talk into the phone a little bit more? So you're a little bit faint.
Yes, my bad. My
no
bad.
worries.
Okay. So today's matchup: Matt Gaetz versus Josh Hawley, and let's go with Marjorie Taylor Greene versus Marsha Blackburn.
In a fight? Yeah, you always do this. Okay, Sam, I don't know. You pick it.
I don't even know what is going on here.
Well, I guess
is this what
maybe,
happens on Thursdays?
Yeah, maybe we will sometimes take calls and
cage match.
Okay, so Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene, despite how terribly she works out, as has been documented, she does still work out. Like, she's gonna ruin her body with whatever those kipping CrossFit pull-ups that she's been doing. But there is some muscle mass being gained in other areas, so I think she'd pretty easily take down Marsha Blackburn, who doesn't seem like a fighter. I don't know if you would agree with that.
I hadn't really thought about it. I need more time, obviously, to assess the situation.
Yeah. And then what was the first one?
Holly and Gates, and neither of those guys seem like fighters. I don't know what Holly's background is. Gates is a politician's kid. But Holly has the height advantage. Holly's 5'11", Gates is 5'7".
Oh,
Gates
easy.
is 5'7". I did not.
Yeah.
And Gates also has the look of a guy with a glass jaw, too. I think one punch.
Although Gates has a lot less to lose now, so might have an edge to him.
Scrappy.
I don't think he'd have it in
eyes.
him to be scrappy, though. Like, Gates wouldn't want his face hurt.
I'm not sure that Holly would either, frankly. Alex, appreciate the phone call.
Take care.
Thanks so much.
There you go.
I do miss Celebrity Deathmatch. Remember that show, anybody?
Vaguely.
Yeah.
Calling from a 703 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, this is Dave from Richmond.
Dave from Richmond. What's on your mind?
I just wanted to talk about the marijuana bill we passed in Virginia. It should get enacted on July 1st, but the big things are coming in about 3 years.
All right. Yeah, do.
So the governor actually snuck in at the last minute a provision that licenses can be revoked if the employer does not remain neutral in when their employees are trying to organize, which is a pretty remarkable labor win here.
That's great. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
So that was actually slipped in at the last minute by the governor, which is surprising because Northam doesn't seem like the most pro-labor guy.
Right.
And additionally, 40% of the revenue is going to go towards creating, basically, from what I understand, universal pre-K here in the state. So I can't think of a more progressive marijuana bill that's passed in the country so far.
You know, I'll tell you something. I am now like any scandal that you can get to happen to your Democratic governor is a good thing.
I've had this discussion with my friends. Get dirt on your Democratic governor, and you'll get some good stuff out of it.
Best thing that's happened to Andrew Cuomo.
The New York bill is pretty progressive in and of itself. I mean, it's not as good as it could be, but just in terms of like compared to what Massachusetts put in place, I did an interview on this for Peacock. There's a lot that goes into kind of limiting the amount of already existing marijuana conglomerates, basically, like Cureleaf, I think, is one of them, from essentially buying up all the available dispensaries in the state, and then the money.
Multi-state operators, they call them.
State operators.
I appreciate the call. It's a really interesting.
Hey, real quick, Sam.
Yeah.
Can I get a shofar for my neighbor who just put in a French drain, and it's raining here pretty hard. So he's a Majority Report listener, and he's probably got me in his ear right now.
Oh, good job. French drain. Well done. Smart. Very smart.
All right. Appreciate it, guys. Take care.
Thanks for the call. Folks, when you build your house, listen
Is that
to me.
the thing around the basement where it's like kind of they're little rocks and it's like a little moat mostly?
Well, no. French drain is actually like a drain in the middle of your basement. And and I mean, this is the thing. When you build your house, you can skimp on the infrastructure and pay later, or you can do it right. And you put in a French drain. It's going to cost you a little bit more. You gotta maybe you gotta put in a drain. You gotta have it go out. It's not they'll use those like big white plastic thing with the perforations and it'll save you a headache later. Just make sure your basement's dry, folks. That's the most important thing. Put a French drain in there. You never have to worry about it.
Wet basement doesn't sound good.
Yeah, a lot of people have them. I would like to see kid tested Politburo approved says a freedom drain sounds even better. That's a good point. I would like to see like a breakdown of that dynamic where what's really interesting is you see these Democratic governors who get caught in some type of near career ending scandal, who stay in office, right? Cuomo, Northam are two that just obviously come to mind. And they have to shore up their left flank. Like as opposed to tacking right in those instances.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, you know, if there's something scandalous about like a Manchin or a Kelly or a Warner or a Cinema, you go for it and they got to tack left. I don't know if that's just a governor thing or what.
Well, speaking of Cinema, do we have Cinema's social media posts from the other day?
Oh, let's put this up. Yeah, so is this her Instagram thing?
Yeah, I don't know if anyone saw this, but Kristen Cinema continues to try to just cosplay as the lady from the Hunger Games, right? The one played by Elizabeth Banks. Her ring says, is that fuck you? That's what it says? Or fuck off?
Fuck off, yeah.
Oh, yeah, cool. She's got funky pink glasses, drinking some sangria. Glasses match her hat. What kind of hat is that? That's not the Samuel L. Jackson type hat. That's like the reverse. What's it, a newsboy cap?
Yeah, it's a newsy cap.
All right, but she'd say, excuse me, it's a news lady cap. That's my politics.
Brunch is back.
What'd you say?
Brunch
is back.
Yeah, she's all about that brunch life.
But this is all part of her Maverick branding too, right? I mean, this is a function of, and listen, there's no amount of cynicism that I think you can have towards Kristen Cinema and be too cynical, right? Like, this is a person who's just like sort of just completely one of the most cynical politicians I think that we've had, you know, just blatantly in a long time. And she is just creating a, you know, this, you can read the story. She's brash and, you know, it is on Instagram and, you know, telling everybody on Instagram, she's an anarchist. But when she gets into the Senate floor, she's, you know, to the right of Mark Kelly.
In her bones,
and,
right, yeah.
And that's why Arizona loves, I mean, that's the story that she's trying to build there, right? Like, that is exactly, in fact, if you're in Arizona, send me that when that profile comes out, because it will. That is what she's looking for. That's the brand, right?
She should have put that fuck off ring on her thumb, the one she used to vote down the $15 minimum wage with her little hip thrust, because that's basically what she's trying to say to anybody who is on the left, or anybody who would have benefited from a $15 minimum wage. It's just fuck off. I don't care. It's not a part of my personal colorful branding exercise. I mean, the amount of Lily Pulitzer that this woman must own, I shudder thinking about it. It's disturbing in and of itself.
Speaking of branding and reformation, John Boehner is on his tour, but I don't know.
It's Boehner. It's definitely not Boner.
Are you sure?
I'm 95% sure.
Do you know how a boa constrictor is spelled?
BOA.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
What
about John Doe?
DOE.
Right. Okay. So BOE is Doe. Is Bo.
I've listened to you covered the news. Had you ever referred to him as Boner in your like many years of doing the show?
I think every time.
Yeah, all the time. That's the way we say it.
That's John Doe, John Bo, and then Ner. The H is silent.
Right, but he no matter if you're talking about the phonetics of it, right? It could go either way, and the guy's not going to refer to himself as a boner. Like, that's just not.
I didn't say a boner. I said John Boner.
Well, I mean, I'm just talking about from the pure strategic, you know, naming process.
He's not
like
in
how he
politics
decides to go. Okay, fine. He can become a boner now that he's out.
The former House Speaker was on with Dana Bash on CNN, and listen to this And then we'll just give you some of the greatest hits of John Boehner, whatever his name is.
He's looking good too, by the way.
Oh
tan.
man, yeah, that's Trump. That's a real tanning bed situation.
All right, go ahead.
I first want to start with the moment that we're in this country. We've had yet another mass shooting Thursday night, a couple overnight. 8 people in Indianapolis, that's the one on Thursday, were killed. 47 mass shootings in the United States in just over the last month. And I know you know this, polls show the vast majorities of Americans support at least some new gun restrictions. When you were Speaker, there were 20 first graders who were killed in Newtown, Connecticut. Looking back now, do you regret not passing new gun laws then? And do you want to see Republicans come to the table now, at least, to pass something?
Well, back when Newtown happened, we couldn't find common ground with the other side. And, I heard the earlier segment, and hopefully there's some common ground to be found. I know that Senator Pat Toomey's been working on this across the aisle, trying to come to some agreement. And hopefully they'll find some common ground, because this is, frankly, it's heartbreaking. I think it's embarrassing our country to the rest of the world, and we've got to find a way to deal with this problem.
So this would be a top priority for you, if you were still Speaker of the House.
Why'd you give that to him?
But I'm not. So those in power now are going to have to figure out what can be done. It's not about what everybody wants. It's a matter of what can be accomplished in a bipartisan way.
What a lazy question.
I mean,
or deliberate in order to just kind of wash the Republican Party of the history pre-Trump, which is seemingly the media's operation.
That's exactly what it is. Because I mean, look, she clearly knew she was going to ask that question, and she could have. I mean,
yeah,
the Manchin-Toomey bill in 2013. Here's Alec McGillis. In April 2013, he tweeted this out. Politico headline: when Congress was closer than it had been in years to passing major gun law legislation. This is, months, a year after Sandytown, more or less. Months after Sandytown.
Sandy Hook.
Sandy Hook, excuse me. Political headline: House Speaker John Boehner cast serious doubt Wednesday on whether he would bring the Senate's gun control bill to a vote. Dave Weigel at the time. Boehner opposed any gun bill action in the House, saying he'd see what the Senate passed. And of course, it led to nothing because of the Senate filibuster. But the bottom line is, had he passed it, it would have put pressure on the Republicans in the Senate. The idea that, like, none of this, everything is, everything. This is the way that people avoid doing anything, which is they say that it's sort of a fait accompli, and it is what it is. And there's nothing I can do. And if you're the Speaker of the House, there is something you can do. That's just the bottom line.
Well, this is a part of his Rewrite History media tour that the media's entirely complicit in.
And it's not just, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's not just about him. This is a way of making the Republican Party look like it was sane pre-Donald Trump. Because he's the last Speaker of the House, right? Pre-Donald Trump. This is a way to make the Republican Party look like they were not the lunatics that they are still today.
And Dana Bash was covering this fight post Sandy Hook and how outrageous the Republicans' position on this was.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, Boehner didn't bring up a bill in order to not put pressure on the Senate Republicans, and so they were able to just kind of, despite months, I would say, of liberal outrage, diffuse the situation. And now he's going to try to pretend like he had no power to push that conversation forward. There was agreement between Senate and House Republicans on how to tackle this. He wasn't just some rogue actor, like he was complicit in a Republican strategy that downplayed any chance of gun control. And so now he's saying it would be at the top of his list of priorities. Please, him and Mitch McConnell together, you really?
Exactly. Give me a break.
And he does. I mean, Brendan said he looks like a dried tomato. I mean, he's in Florida now. I hope he's enjoying that retirement. He looks like a walking.
Well, he's not retired. let's be clear, he's retired from the House, but he's working.
He looks like he's
bring
doing a lot of
marijuana
work
to,
laying by the pool.
He's making a lot of phone calls. This is a way to make sure that he gets back out there and make a couple more phone calls and seal the deal.
Needs a couple more mil.
Let's play this. This is really just stunning. Joe Biden got a bunch of pressure. He signed an executive order in the first couple of weeks of his administration to raise the cap on refugees coming into this country. But there was one more element that he needed to sign off on. I can't remember what it's called now. One more element that he needed to sign off on. And everybody was like waiting for him to do that. It was sort of pro forma at that point, once he had been so explicit about his intention. And they waited and they waited and they waited. And it became clear 3 or 4 weeks ago that, wait a second, he's not doing that. And then we heard reported last week, it was 2 weeks ago, that the reason why the Biden administration is not lifting the cap on refugees, that the number of refugees led into this country is actually less than it was under Donald Trump, was because they were afraid of the optics based upon everything that was happening at the border. Now, understand, like, the optics, first off, just put aside all of the moral obligations that we have as a country or as human beings. Put that aside for just one moment. The optics that he's worried about are Trump lovers, Republicans, mad about more immigrants coming into this country, right? It's not like it's not the optics of like, hey, we are caging thousands of children or detaining thousands of children, regardless of what you think, whose fault it is that it's there. And so what we really should do is not help other people integrate into our society.
Wait, Sam, you're telling me that Tucker Carlson didn't stop criticizing Biden over the border when he made this decision to continue Trump's extremely low refugee entrance policy?
It's so insane that they would perceive the optics in that manner as opposed to another. And so they've got a lot of pressure. They just made an announcement. They're going to lift it to 15,000. His promise was 65,000 year one. Really
from 15,000
should be like, yeah. And he's going back up to 15,000, which is basically the Trump numbers. Here is Dana Bash pressing Biden on that. Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, on this. This is just such hogwash.
I need to ask about refugees. After intense criticism Friday from your fellow Democrats, the administration abruptly backtracked on plans to keep in place a Trump-era limit of only 15,000 refugees for this year. Now the White House is saying it will raise the limit, but it's unlikely to meet the previous pledge to allow up to 62,500 refugees before the end of September. So can you explain why the Biden administration is breaking that promise?
Well, first, we're not breaking that promise. When we came into office, we faced two fundamental problems. The first was that the cap was too low, only 15,000 people, and President Biden has pledged to raise it. The second was the allocation under that cap meant that 0 people from Africa could come as refugees.
Right.
Effectively, 0 people from the Middle East could come as refugees. So this past week, he took the first step, which was to change those allocations so that people could literally get on planes from Africa to come here. Second, by May 15th, he will fix the second piece. He will raise the cap. We haven't determined the number. And what will drive our determination are the practical questions of whether we can fix the absolutely shattered system that we were left with to process refugees. And then, of course, how we ensure that the same office, the Office of Refugee Responsibility that takes care of those coming in as refugees, also takes care of unaccompanied minors at the border, how it can do both. And I would just ask you to wait and see. The president will lay out a new target He is currently allowing refugees to get on planes today. And once we've laid out that new target, you will see that he is following through on his commitment with respect to refugees.
Jake, you said he's not breaking the promise or going back on the promise, and now you're saying that there will be a new commitment. So which one is it? Is he going to keep that promise to raise the cap to 62,500, or will he give a new number whenever he makes that announcement?
When I said new target, what I meant was a target above 15,000.
Right.
So in other words, he will
break the promise.
He is keeping the promise. It just depends on where you stop in the sentence. I will be raising the cap to 65,000. Well, you have to choose where in the sentence you say the promise was made. I will be raising the cap.
What?
And if you stop there, he is still saying that he will be raising the cap.
And he wasn't going to raise the cap until the media called him out on it, which is, something that politicians often do. But I mean, this was such a brazen example of it that because they got media blowback, they then committed to raising the cap, but they weren't going to do so. And then they're going to act as if Biden made the decision of his own accord.
Yeah, well, and look, I don't care if Biden made the decision of his own accord. Ultimately, like the bottom line, this is a reason why you need to keep pushing because, we said this from the beginning. Biden's a cipher, and he's gone back on this, worried about he's at one, and the ciphering works both ways, right? I mean, it goes both directions. Like he's not just he's nervous because he's taking pressure about what's happening at the border. The idea that just do the 65,000 and then move on. There's no
cost, but they pretend there's a cost, or they think it's a cost because the media for a few weeks decided to obsess about the border, and ABC sent down their entire correspondent team to do a analysis and a news show with the border as the backdrop, and the Beltway media drives everything in this kind of administration way more so than we would like, of course, and like a progressive or even a Donald Trump administration, right? Like the Beltway media is the big barometer for how the Biden camp is going to operate.
Yeah, and it's too bad because on some level, there was a feeling early on that if they keep rolling things out there, there's no traction. But when they're slow walking this stuff, it functions in a way that is opposite of what it appears that they think it does.
What? Just that it signals weakness and.
No, what it does is it gives the media time to catch its breath and actually build a story. So if the day they report that there's 8,000 children in the system stuck at the border, whatever it was, 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago, they should have said, and we're raising the refugees to 65,000. And then 3 days later, they should have done something else. And just keep layering on so that there's no opportunity to build. If they're so afraid of what is being said on One America Network or that ABC is going down to the border, you come up with another story so that by the time they decide to go down to the border, it's like, wait a second, should we follow this or this? I mean, it really is, if they're going to play this, if they're going to be this sensitive to the media, they should figure out how to work the media a little better. That's my point.
Well, the Democrats haven't been able to do that in decades. They just respond to the right wing's been able to do it very effectively. Actually, I take that back. The Democrats have worked it quite effectively during Democratic primaries.
On some level.
On some level, but.
One of the things you hear all the time about with right wingers is Chicago gun deaths, and certainly the amount of guns in Chicago and murders in Chicago is horrible. Same also in Baltimore.
That's what happens when a community can't trust law enforcement.
Well, it's also a function of like, why are there so many guns in these places, as opposed to like, you know.
Well, I'm saying that's why it's like the Hayes goes into this in Colony in a Nation, but it's also the dynamic you see in drug cartels, right? Like when the police just aren't really a force other than an occupier there. You can't have people just go to anyone to solve problems. People turn to their own, Wild West type of solutions.
Right. And why is it so easy is the point. Well, for them to get guns in these places that supposedly have gun laws. Well, as you know, you can travel between states. And really? Yes. And so here is Pamela Brown interviewing James Comer. He is the Republican congressman from Kentucky's 1st District.
Disturbingly sounds like James Comey. He might be part of the deep state. Just a new iteration, but
just be careful.
Something to think about.
And this is apparently something that he's never even contemplated when it comes to gun violence.
Over actual lives, prioritizing the right to buy a deadly weapon over life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that we were all guaranteed. What about the right to not be shot?
Well, we've got laws on the books to make it illegal to shoot someone. I think it was very clear that the framers of our Constitution made gun ownership a priority. It was the Second Amendment. And if you look at the states that have banned guns and the cities that have banned guns, Chicago, Washington, D.C., they have some of the highest rates of gun violence. So just passing laws banning guns doesn't solve the problem. But we have a problem in America. And I think Republicans realize that, and we want to address the issue.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but it's sometimes different points are made, and I just want to make sure that we look at the numbers and facts when you say something. But I did look at the numbers for crimes in cities and states with strict gun laws, and I saw what you had said repeatedly, but nearly 2/3 of crime guns recovered in states with strong gun laws were originally sold in states with weak gun laws. So if gun laws don't matter, why are criminals going to states with weaker gun laws, bringing that gun back to a state with a stronger gun laws and committing crimes?
Well, I can't answer that, but I can tell you that in the states that have where you see like Kentucky, where you have a strong belief in the Second Amendment, overwhelming support for the Second Amendment, it seems like you have less instances of gun violence. I think if a criminal really sits and thinks about it, and they want to go in and create havoc, they know that in areas where there's more gun ownership, they're less likely to achieve their goals. And that's a terrible example to use, but I think that's really what the data would show. And I'm really open.
I'm looking at the data right here.
Solve these problems.
I'm looking at the data right here showing nearly 2/3 of crime guns recovered in states with strong gun laws were originally sold in states with.
What was he trying to say about the love for the Second Amendment?
He's trying to say that Kentucky is, it's easy to buy guns there, but people aren't going to use them there, supposedly, because there's no soft targets.
Right. Because everybody is packing, right?
That's his argument. Now, I don't know if Kentucky is any less or not. We certainly have seen gun violence, like at gun ranges where everybody has a gun, and we definitely see situations.
Shooting,
of course,
the Indianapolis shooting that just happened at the FedEx facility. Pretty sure Indiana's fairly right wing.
The point being that it doesn't even occur to him. I have no idea why people would get guns in places where they're much easier to get and bring them to places where they're not.
He really sputtered there.
That's good for her. She did a good job in questioning him there.
Yeah.
That was
Pamela
good.
Brown.
Credit where credit's due. Tough things happening on the Mike Lindell front.
Oh, dear. How is it possible that he's unraveling even more than he had the previous day?
I don't know which one of these clips we should play. Should we play both of these?
Yeah, we can pair them, shot and chaser.
Let's do first this clip number 13. This is on Saturday. This is at the Health and Freedom Conference in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is a perfect example of a guy who has lost the plot, right? I mean, for those of you who don't remember, Mike Lindell is the My Pillow guy. He was convinced that this election was stolen, that Donald Trump was the genuine winner, but that these different voting machine, smart tech and Dominion, and they conspired with who knows who to change the vote and this and that. And he basically got booted off of every TV network because they are all getting sued. Fox is getting sued for like $1.5 billion or something like that. OWN had to like write out, an on-air disclaimer. People had to take away his microphone. You don't hear much from a lot of those cancel culture people, complaining that OWN, shut down Mike Lindell. But here's what happens when you fixate on something too much, you lose the plot. Remember, this was ultimately about the stolen election for Donald Trump. But here's Mike Lindell taking lemons and turning it into lemonade.
Donald Trump in. It's in our Constitution. All the states would have flipped it and put him in. But guess what? It's a miracle they didn't do that. Because why? Because we wouldn't have found out about the machines and the evidence of Dominion and Smartmatic and this attack by China that came into our country and stole our election.
Pause. I just want to remind you, this is the Health and Freedom Conference underway in Oklahoma. And if you can see anyone in that room, that rather packed room with a mask on, this is not footage from a year and a half ago.
No.
This is footage from a couple of days ago during a pandemic, folks. I just wanted to remind you that is the health and freedom part.
The event, according to local news, ended with a mask burning event. Just to give you a sense.
And he is happy that Donald Trump did not become president because now we know the truth about the machines in China.
I didn't think he would be happy about this, given his commentary.
That's why he's lost the thread.
Months.
He's lost the thread a little bit.
No.
But here we go. It's Freedom and Health Conference.
So, you guys, you got to know that's the second miracle, and
Oh, that was it.
Oh, well, I was hoping to hear about the second miracle.
Yeah, me too. I could watch that, frankly, all day. But here is
just one more thing about the Health and Freedom Conference, by the way. It's just, is this like new kind of offshoot of CPAC, because CPAC got too mainstream for these folks? I think that's kind of what they wanted. A lot of these are sprouting up, these more Q-oriented conspiracy theory, like CPAC type things.
When I was in college.
And that was a packed room.
When I was in college, we had Thursday night kegs. And then we had Thursday night rebel kegs. For people would set up keggers that were not associated. Same dynamic.
Wow. Well, yeah.
Same dynamic. Here is My Pillow CEO Mike Lindell holding a Frankathon event. Can you guys explain to me what a Frankathon event is?
He's got a packed schedule.
Frank is his social media platform that he's launching today.
Ah, okay. And it's also, this gives you the opportunity to be frank about stuff. Like, you don't have to hold back.
Oh, I guess that's really the...
Is that it?
So long as you're not taking the Lord's name in vain.
You're a frank people?
And so he's holding it's a live event, right?
Mm-hmm. Maybe it's ongoing now. Maybe you should call in at some point soon.
Random Mike.
And they have the call screeners. All right, so let's play this clip.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Hey, hold on. I think I got a reporter beaming in. Scott, thank you for calling in. God bless you.
He's so bad.
Hello.
Hey, Mike, it's Ron with the Wall Street Journal.
Yes, you're live. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, that's great. But, Mike, I have some bad news to tell you, I'm afraid, and I hope you can share this with everybody. But unfortunately, Alexa passed away just a few minutes ago from a drug overdose.
Okay, this is a prank phone. This is a prank phone call. You see what they're doing, everybody? That was an attack there because I brought up this great reporter And that was an attack. You heard it here. This is what these attack groups are doing. Prime example there. We took it live.
Take a breath.
Okay, so just to be clear, that's his own personal cell phone that somebody got hold of and pranked him on the air, I guess. And it's an attack. It's an attack. Prank phone calls are an attack. And then
was this in our sound sheet? I didn't see
no,
this before.
No, they just posted this. That was it. That's
okay. So who Alexa? Was that what was said? I couldn't even hear.
He had some type of reporter or something supposedly.
Oh.
That is, can we watch that? Is that ongoing right now?
I'll check, but we have one more clip from it.
All right. Oh, yeah. Let's see. Oh, this is another clip. Do we know who's pranking him?
I love how he thinks it's an attack.
Or is it just Americans? Who's attacking him here?
Right, not pranking.
I'm not sure, but they do a good job.
Who's assaulting Mike Lindell today?
I also saw the policy implications. I said
All
a
right.
year ago.
I think we got breaking news here with a guest.
Hello?
Hello, yes, I have Mr. Trump on standby. Are you ready?
Yes.
Go ahead, sir. Hello, everyone.
Oh, we have the president here, our real president, everyone. Hello, Mr. President.
MacronShow.com, bitches.
Okay.
All right.
What was it? Microshow.com?
I don't know.
Can we play that again? Play that again. It was
They
too
need
fun.
better
I like the
voices.
fact how he also is he hard of hearing? Because he's like having
he's
to.
an old man on the like.
He doesn't realize he can lift the phone.
Right. It's
This
gotta be on
is
the
worse
desk.
than me on his phone. With me, I'm always.
Hello, yes. I have Mr. Trump on standby. Are you ready?
Yes.
Go ahead, sir. Hello, everyone.
Oh, we have the president here, our real president, everyone. Hello, Mr. President.
MacronShow.com, bitches.
Okay.
All right.
I
Sorry,
guess that
folks.
wasn't. I guess that was.
Sorry,
you see what they're
folks.
doing? They're attacking us. They're attacking us, and this is what. I mean, it even came up. There he was hacking into our phones. It came up.
Hacking into our phones by calling it. I figured out how to hack in. You know what? There's a lot of people who've hacked into my phone.
Yeah.
All I did was give them a series of numbers, like 10 numbers in a row. And they're able to use the phone lines to make my phone ring. And when I answer it, they're on it.
So you're saying you gave them 3 numbers.
I
and
gave
then
them
3
10
numbers,
numbers.
And then 4. Okay.
Yeah, I gave them 10 numbers, and they are able to somehow get into my phone
from anywhere.
From anywhere. They could be anywhere. And then I don't pick up the phone. The way I listen to the phone is like this.
Yeah. Don't pick it up. Because if you pick it
they're
up,
on the other
hackers
side.
win. Yeah.
They have broken through. That was definitely all they did is they just took a video of him and just recorded it. I thought they were going to do a whole soundboard thing, which they should have done.
Well, I mean, that would require some sense of humor or a soundboard thing.
Yeah, soundboard thing. The prank caller.
Oh, gotcha.
What is MicronShow.com?
I don't know.
Bitches is what he said.
Yeah.
Is this Frank? I thought this was a social media site, but I think I'm on it, and it appears to just a live stream with Michael Flynn. Am I confused?
I have a feeling we're going to have to spend some time on that. We need to rejigger the show so that all we're doing is mirroring what they're doing.
We have faith in our institutions, or we used to have faith in our institutions of government. We no longer have faith in our institutions of
Reading
government.
off a cue card.
One of the things that I'd ask you is, why are we here? Why do you believe that we have arrived at this point with this type of incredible situation that we face? Why do you believe we're here?
Because it's Satan's last hurrah.
Oh, okay.
You know, Satan is the ruler.
A Chiron
of
would be
planet,
nice.
And this is his last hurrah before we see the greatest revival of spiritual revival in America, in American history since before the Revolutionary War.
Whoa, wait, what?
Wait, so that's...
You're stopping playing that? Dude, we're just getting to the part where we find out that Satan's gonna die.
Called television. And people have allowed that spirit of fear to get into our bodies and into our minds. Look at how we allowed the churches to be shut down. Where are all of the lame pastors that should be standing in the gap and on the word of God? You know, we are in a pivotal point in time in history where it's time that everybody comes forward, and they're going to have to make a really strong decision. It's going to be very pivotal. Are you going to go with the truth, and are you going to put your faith and trust in God? Or are you going to go with the biologos people and all the people that believe in scientism?
I'm going with God by way of Michael Flynn.
Science, which is a degenerative place, and is not putting your faith and trust in God.
I love the fact you mentioned biologos. I know that group. I've been writing about them for years. You and I will have a lot to talk about. You are up on what's going on. You know, it's very interesting because the very definition of science is observation and repeatable experiment. Observation and repeatable experiment. And so much of what's going on today, we can recreate what is going on. So therefore, we can observe it and we can repeat it. We can observe it and we can repeat it.
What?
And many things like that. Therefore meet the definition of science, and yet we're called science deniers. Reality is, I've been saying they're the liars and the science deniers, and the truth is on our side. But you bring up a very good point. I don't know if you know this, but I wrote a book that came out in November of 2018 called Marxianity, about Christianity, Marxism merging, because that's what we have going on.
Oh, hell yeah.
People like Reinhold Niebuhr and others are religious Marxists who merged it together. We have people doing this on the Protestant side, on the Catholic side. We're seeing this go on in all denominations.
Catholics have been doing this. Come on.
And in that book, I predicted that many of America's biggest churches, I'm talking about on the Protestant side now, many of America's biggest churches and denominations would not have to be persecuted. They would not have to be persecuted. They would be simply purchased. You wouldn't have to persecute them. You could purchase them. And I gave evidence of how...
Okay. What's good? Why is this guy wearing somebody's, like, he's wearing the shirt of somebody who's apparently got forearms that are like 4 times the size of his.
Yeah. Well, it's the Trump fashion. They want things, you know, he made his suits really big to seem less fat.
Here is a serious question.
Okay.
If Satan's going to die, and there's going to be a huge revival, why can't they just basically say, like, so we're going to disengage from politics for a while? Because it doesn't matter.
Well, no, everything that it's about convincing people that believe in heaven and hell that what they do on earth matters now. So their actions in everyday life, aka, you know, if they believe that Hugo Chavez's ghost changed the voting system in Dominion, like, that matters in terms of if Satan's going to die or not.
But my point is if things are going to work out okay from their perspective, inevitably, like, why not just leave
I believe she
the
said it
profane
was
to the rest
Satan's
of us?
last stand, which means that your actions are very determinative.
Yeah, they're agents of revival.
Right.
All right.
I'm here for, you know, the final episode of Satan. Let's see how it goes.
There's a similar split in Marxism that this is just going to happen on its own, or we're going to have to make it happen. So, you know, maybe we are converging Christianity and Marx.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you gave into his book thesis.
Should we play Jimmy Dore saying that AOC is worse than the Boogaloo Boys?
Nah.
I don't care.
I don't care either. I'm sure Glenn will ask him about that next time they talk.
Oh, well, did Glenn ask about Jimmy's opinions on Lula da Silva, or?
No, I think they just talked about how great each other were, and then they never brought up the Lava Jato t-shirt.
Interesting.
Here is a call from 802, calling from an 802 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, is this me?
It is you.
Hey, this is John from Vermont. Very nice to get through. I'm a huge fan of you guys.
John from Vermont.
I just had a couple of thoughts real quick. I don't want to take up too much time, and I don't want to rehash things, but I was remembering Trump saying 1917 all the time, and I don't know if he's just a moron who watches too much TV. Ads for the movie. But like, if you take the movie,
I don't know what you just did to your phone, but I can't hear you.
Hello?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. So 1917.
I'm sorry,
yeah.
Sam.
Go ahead.
About the 1917. So if you took a 19 and a 17, that's an 8-8. That's like the HH that the right wing uses. Anyway, you know what I mean? It's like the Heil to the idiot.
I would 1970, but you'd have to. I don't know. I think there's much more worry and crypto-fascist signaling that occurred from like Department of Homeland Security during the Trump administration. I think that's just straightforward anti-communism.
You're trying to say it was
Okay.
like 9 minus 1 is 8 and 1 plus 7 is 8. So Heil Hitler.
Yeah, in essence. But like, also there was that movie 1917 that was out. So I'm like, that was the one out. I'm kind of giving him like, oh, maybe he was just watching too much TV.
Well,
I would say that's a good.
Yeah, I mean, it also could be just like, yeah, I remembered World War One.
Well, I mean, I think he was saying 1917 because he mixed up the date for the 1918 pandemic. So, you know, there were a ton of, you know, white supremacist symbolism in the Trump era that was put out. I just don't know if that's one of it. But, like, you know, you're looking in the right places.
Right on. No, I appreciate it. And also, I think like cops need to get more training in like Qigong instead of like Krav Maga.
Yeah, I look. I mean, I appreciate the phone call. Like, you know, my sense is like the specific training that they're getting at this point seems irrelevant, right? Because you have all these different mixes. The bottom line is they should not be engaging in situations that they're just not necessary. That the end result is not a benefit to society. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 509 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam.
Yeah.
How are you? This is Ronald Reagan.
Oh, Ronald Reagan. Where are you calling from, Ronald Reagan?
I'm calling from Yakima, Washington.
Okay, great. And you're in your car.
Hey.
Yeah.
Hey.
All right. I'm going to take it off speaker.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
You're not supposed to be driving.
Is this good radio so far?
This is great stuff. Great stuff.
Hey, two quick things. The other day you said that in Hollywood, actors now, they don't look down on, like, taking commercials. Imagine that you heard that from Benjamin after he did all those Arby's commercials. And he was like, no, Hollywood's different now, Sam.
Referring to John Benjamin doing those Arby's commercials. Yeah. He was like a little bit nervous to do them. And then it was like, dude, it didn't impact your career at all, except for they just like, you know, dropped a Brinks truck in front of him and that was it.
Right. Anyways, quick question. So I think the audience has been able to figure out that Matt Leck smokes marijuana, even though he tried to play cool by pretending to smoke CBD cigarettes for a long time. And then Emma came
Smokables.
up and was like, I'm just going to get high and watch Godzilla this weekend. And
well, I said I
like...
might, but I didn't do. I engaged in alcohol this weekend for my birthday.
Engaged in alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
But
I
Sam,
engaged with it.
I think the audience wants to know, like, if you enjoy the green thing.
I mean, my understanding is it's legal in New York now, and so I will probably try it. I
will probably try it.
I got arrested when I was 19 for having marijuana in
You
a
did?
car. Yeah,
I got busted on the streets of New York for smoking a joint.
No way.
And yeah, back in the day, I used to smoke a lot of pot. And
like every day.
I went through. No, I was never wake and bake. I'm more of like a nighttime smoker. But I haven't really smoked much pot in the past 10 years. I don't have the time, frankly. Because I don't function like I can't go and then do work when I'm high. I can't do that. You know, and
there are a lot of people I know who can, and I never was able to. Although I did go to class high in college, but that was like stupid classes where I didn't have to try.
But I don't I think basically since my first kid got old enough to smell it, or and then
You could just take edibles.
well, no, edibles take too long,
Yeah.
and it keeps me awake when I get high.
They're hard to predict too.
They're hard to predict.
Get a little vape pen.
I do. No, I have a little vape pen.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I smoke on occasion, but nothing regular.
All right.
I appreciate the call. That's a really.
Well, what about you, Reagan?
Yeah. What about you? Hung up. Didn't want to answer the question. All right, the final call of the day, folks. Calling from a 714. When is it legal in New York State?
It's legal now to just smoke on the street, but
is it?
It's not going to basically. Matt, that's correct, right? Like they basically just said, you can do that. You can smoke on the sidewalk, except in front of.
Any place cigarette smoking is allowed, is my understanding.
Yeah, so that's officially, but they're not going to start really. I think the dispensary thing's probably not going to happen until next year.
And I've noticed it just walking around Brooklyn. I've seen guys just smoking joints on the street. It's awesome.
Last night I went out to dinner and there was someone smoking pot, and the waitress was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry for the smell." I'm like, I don't care. I don't care that it's lovely. It's the smell of freedom.
Smell of freedom. There we go. Let's. You're calling from a 714 area code. Who's this?
Is this me?
Yep.
Sweet. This is Andrew from Orange County, California.
Andrew from Morristown, California. What's on your mind?
Orange County. Sorry.
Orange County.
Anyway.
You're the final caller of the day.
First of all, I want to say I read quite a few of your books who you've had authors on during COVID, and I can't recommend David Dan's Monopolize anymore. It's really fantastic.
Yep.
Anyway, I kind of want to take it over to the sports desk, if you don't mind, to send it out. There's pretty huge news in the soccer world, which is my pride and joy, and it's really an insane takeover by the billionaires of the kind of capitalistic world, of the business side of these huge clubs. And know that, I don't know if you guys have contact with the gentleman over at Jacobin. I think his name's Nando.
Yeah.
Who's very, very informed on this stuff. I think he used to be a correspondent for one of the sports channels. Anyway.
I don't know anything about soccer, like not a thing.
Yeah,
so just so you know.
Well, so my team, who I follow because of my family's origins from Liverpool in the UK, they are owned by your truly Boston capitalist John Henry, Fenway Sports Group. So Boston and them have the same owners, and LeBron James now, who has a partial ownership, which is pretty insane. Anyway, They have decided to go into this, which the news now is they are going to start breaking away from the basically, it's hard to explain in American sports terms because we don't really have anything like it, because you have your leagues, your domestic leagues inside of, let's say, the big five countries, which is UK, France, Italy, Spain, Germany. You have your domestic leagues. On the weekends, let's just say arbitrarily, on the weekdays, you have a tournament called the Champions League, which is basically the top teams in these leagues play each other. It's a very competitive game, very prestigious. Who wins this? Obviously, it's a huge thing for the club. Now, in this new league, they're trying to break away and essentially scrap all of that, make their own, and for the first 20 years, they're grandfathered in, and they don't have to qualify for it. So in these first games, they're going to be qualifying for it no matter what, or in the first few years, rather. But the main problem here is they're going to be getting huge lump sum of cash up front to participate in this, while the rest of these clubs who just got destroyed by COVID and are more fan-based and don't have billionaire owners are not going to get in. And this is just going to concentrate the wealth and skill and power to the top of these clubs and destroy the rest of what they have there rather than the NCAA here, which is farm systems and developmental leagues, and second and first tier with relegation and promotion, which is another thing that we don't have in the United States.
Well, we got a clip from an owner talking about, I think, these decisions. But appreciate the call. We'll play this clip.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yeah.
This is just a newsreader in the UK, but he's reading a quote from an owner.
And we're being told also that in general, the owner's view is this, and this is a quote from a board member at one of the 6 clubs. Our primary job is to maximise our revenues and profits. The wider good of the game is a secondary concern. So there we have it from the mouth of a board member at one of these 6 clubs. What they're interested in is profit and revenue. The wider good of the game, a secondary concern.
So what? So this is like, I'm looking at it now, the founding members: Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, Manchester City, Manchester United, like Real Madrid. I mean, like, all of these are gonna, like, the already existing top soccer clubs, from my understanding, throughout the world. So it's becoming even more top heavy. I need to look into this. I don't know enough.
We're gonna have Nando on Left Reckoning this week talking about this, but yeah, I mean, we owe it to the shareholders, not the sport. Is, I don't know, probably good propaganda material, I would say, for trying to make people anti-capitalist.
Pretty naked, straightforward, right? I mean, that lays it right out there.
Yeah.
All right, let's read a bunch of IMs and then we're going to get out of here. Let's see. Militant apathy. Lots of people assigned to training were F-ups that failed upward and laterally. Dulce moce. Dulce de moce. Whenever issues around social media and tech come up, the MR crew focuses on legislative fix and accepts that these are the only platforms we can have. Makes sense for a political show, but I'm a software engineer, and I don't accept that. I just sent an email about a platform I'm building. Can you take a look and consider supporting? Sure. But if it's successful, we're going to ultimately... Well, no. I just want to clarify something. The legislative fixes are not about accepting these are the only platforms we can have. The legislative fixes are to make it easier for your or anybody else's platforms to survive and grow. That's one of the biggest points, is that's the whole point of, not the whole point, but it's a big part of the antitrust approach is to allow for alternate platforms to grow in this environment. And I mean, and if it does well, then we're going to have a problem with yours too. Well, theoretically, on some level, we could. So that's the point there. It's the opposite. Those legislative fixes are an attempt to make sure that they're not the only platforms we can have. At least in my I'm speaking for myself there. Chardonnay socialist. There is no question that there are profound racial bias in policing, but separate from that, the majority of cops act as if everyone they confront must do whatever they say because they are cops. But that's just not how the law is supposed to work. They are taught to be bullies, and there are no consequences when they kill people, so they err on the side of authoritarian violence. This has to stop and cannot be reformed. Indeed. Gil Gates, I asked you about gun control earlier, and you said it wasn't a priority for you. I see in this a factor in police brutality and violence in the U.S.
Talking about Matt, I think.
No, I mean, I think...
you. Oh, right.
I see this a factor in police brutality and violence in the U.S. I'm not sure. I also don't think that gun control is a top priority for the majority of people who are in favor of it.
But even that, like, to talk about urban communities with gun violence problems, you're going to pass harsher gun laws. You're basically just going to throw more black people in prison. Like that, you have to address these things through the underlying factors than the gun, in my opinion.
Well, I think you also need to sell less guns, and you need to make it harder to buy them. I mean, I'm okay with that too.
Make it a punitive law that like attacks the buyer of the gun. You can make it illegal for manufacturers to make certain kinds of weapons.
And,
right?
I mean, it'll take a while to get, to get as many of those guns off the street. But I mean, when you think about
and do a gun buyback program.
30,000, is it 30,000 people a year who kill themselves through guns? I mean, having easy access to a gun in that situation, I don't know how you quantify this. Maybe someone's actually done a study, but I mean, if people had to wait or had trouble securing a gun, there's no doubt that you would have less suicides.
Yep.
There's just no doubt. I don't know what the number is, but there's no doubt. Attorney Andrew, everyone should listen to the latest episode of the Dig podcast discussing the liberal to ultra-leftist pipeline after they listen to the latest episode of Left Reckoning. For those who don't know, the Dig is hosted by Dan Denver, who is what Sam would have been had Sam A, had a nicer voice, B, or 2, went to grad school instead of a year of law school, 3, grown up in the punk scene instead of next to H. John Benjamin, and 4, been born about 15 years later, which is to say the show is good. If I ellipse from the Dig is hosted by Dan Denver, who is what Sam would have been, it implies that this show is not good.
Although it did seem positive about Left Reckoning.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Attorney Andrew. I hope that the IM that you send to the Dig complimenting the majority report will be read on their show. Oh, they don't take IMs. Is that right? Observer, hey, Sam, now that you're single, how are you getting your shirt collars starched? Hello, Sam Tushy. Demi Jor went on this super small show, The Vanguard, and said the reason he won't debate you is because you're obsessed with him and he doesn't want to give in to your mental illness. Oh, that's very sweet. The host actually said your name, but Demi kept referring to you as the podcast with the Peacock show. Someone is scared to say your name. He really is cowardly about it. I mean, and I'm not going to stop. We just, we just didn't get the material we want. But I don't know. He went after Amy Goodman, incidentally, too. Did you know that?
She a shill, too?
Yeah, she's shill, too.
Right.
It's interesting. This is becoming his whole shtick.
That got me a little mad. Just like Amy's just like, she's as good as it gets at this industry. You're going to go, I mean, he was going after Ryan, so he's got to keep like...
Yeah, I think the idea is just that he...
Going after the best people on the left?
Well, I think the idea is that like
he's putting pressure on everybody.
Yeah, he's putting pressure on everybody. And he also, it's some weird, circle jerk that they've got with that Aaron Mate, who is sort of like the... Does
he even do anything?
The water boy, or like, I've seen like ball boys in tennis who are more self-directed. Do you know what I mean? Like every time there's some type of conflict,
he's always coming to Jimmy's defense.
He just shows up. He just shows up in your in your Twitter feed for like, he's like the self-appointed cavalry. You said in your interview about socialism with Carl that you planned on retiring soon. How many months, years you think we have? Should I cancel my membership so I can draw your retirement out longer? I don't, like, it's hard for me to imagine doing the show past 2008. 2028. But I don't know. It sort of depends.
How far gone are you?
It sort of depends. I don't know. I mean, and by that, I mean, like, I'd probably do it a couple times a week. I mean, like, I don't know. It's also hard for me to imagine not doing the show like once.
I don't know what you do. Yeah.
You got to do it in some capacity.
Right. Teamster from Chicago. Are you saying Demi Jor on purpose? I am. Shucksen. Emma, this Super League nonsense is heartbreaking. Please tell me it's not so.
I don't know anything about soccer, and I'm sorry. I know that European.
But it sounds like it is.
It sounds that way. I'm gonna actually look into it after the show, just because I'm curious.
Aaron is not cool. Emma, Knicks are 6 in a row. How are we feeling?
We're
Sam,
feeling
gotta
good. We're feeling good. I mean, and like I care more about the Rangers in my hardest of, but that's just because the Knicks haven't really given me like the Rangers went to the Stanley Cup Finals at the height of my fandom, so they have a little. But once these Knicks are fun. They really are, and Mitchell Robinson is even playing. So
Sam, are you ever going to get invited into Celebrity Row? Got to be quick. I've been lighting up in public and try and get the word out. I have never been invited to Celebrity Row. I am also not imagining that I will be, but
what's Celebrity Row?
I don't know. Jacob, the town I grew up in is a very small bedroom community far enough north of Milwaukee that the rent has remained low, which is why I was upset to hear that roughly
the
half
Knicks Celebrity Row. Sorry.
Half the apartments were sold by a local family of carpenters to a real estate holding company, God knows where. And now a 2-bedroom apartment that cost my grandmother $650 3 years ago will cost a new renter $900. Jeez. Train boy, great news, MR crew. According to all the tests I've had over the past week, the cancer hasn't spread, and I'm getting the offending Barty part removed this week and should be back on track in no time. Thanks for all the well wishes. You're getting one of these.
So far.
Keep us updated, Train boy. Glad to hear. That's great. James Twu, the details of the propaganda are immaterial. I think Kim Potter lied to make a more favorable case as a union rep. She advised officers in another unarmed killing to sit in their squad cars and not talk to each other to keep their blue wall strong. I'm not sure I know that. Fartface, please have Ben Burgess on to talk about his book on cancel culture. Oh, does he have a book out?
Yeah, it's coming. I don't know if it's out yet, but it's out very soon.
Manchin's death polyp. Sam, did you see Chomsky on Mehdi Hassan last night? Is that the first time Buckley threatened to punch him in the goddamn mouth that he has been on the major network?
Huh?
I don't know. Interesting. Sam, maybe you should be in Saul to prove you're not playing favorites. Good point. I saw a clip of it. That's a good question. Chomsky's been on, I mean, it's cable news. It's Sunday night. But it's been years, I think, since he's been on main.
That's probably a good, like a good case for Mehdi's work,
I wonder if that's the first time in that long a time.
Well, he's a sellout now too because he went on MSNBC.
Right, Comrade Mario. What happens if Chauvin trial verdict is not guilty? I would imagine that there would be extremes amount of anger displayed in public. I mean, how could there not be?
Rightly so.
Barrett Home 2. Sam, can you clarify your traffic stops position? I find it hard to believe you would advocate for no speed, WI, seatbelt, or car safety enforcement. No, I would advocate for all of that enforcement. But I would say you don't necessarily high-speed chase. You could pursue the car. I mean, you got to.
But even then, they pursue way more than they should.
Yes, I would narrow those circumstances. But if somebody's speeding at 75 miles an hour in a 65 mile an hour zone or whatever it is, you clock it, you send them the ticket. If you see DWI, I mean, if someone's driving in a, and you can document they're driving in an erratic fashion that jeopardizes other people's safety, you can pull them over. But you need to have a dramatic narrowing of what constitutes a reason why you would stop the car, as opposed to just sending a ticket. All right, I got 8 more of these, and then we got to go. Denver Dave, our roof gutters and downspouts terminate into French drains. It puts runoff directly back into the ground, preventing erosion, evaporation. Old school technology works. French is best. Let's go. Ardwan. Damn, even if someone with dementia stole from me, I would just be like, dude, make sure she gets home safe. No kidding. It's just absurd. Super dangerous grandma with dementia. To be fair, that cop hadn't framed me as a criminal rather than someone suffering from a medical condition. He might have had to acknowledge that police forces are overfunded, poorly directed, and performing unnecessary jobs that they should not be. Henry. Sam, I know you don't care about this stuff, but in MCU, there's a fan fave character named Ralph Boner, for real, played by Evan Peters.
Evan Peters?
Evan Peters. Libertarian in recovery. The woman was arrested for stealing from Walmart, actually returned the items and tried to pay for them before they made her leave. It's horrible. The full video is the cop getting out of the car, and you can tell he's ready to escalate within 2 seconds of the video starting. It's just obscene. My. Karl Popper has a better definition of science based on whether or not something is falsifiable. Religion is not falsifiable. Really want the frog guy to call in the My Pillow guy. Sam's Big Dictionary. Did you see the New York Post article foreboding about legal weed in New York? The article is titled, Get Ready for an NYC Reeking of Weed and Crawling with Unstable Potheads. James in Jersey. Emma, makes me sad hearing you praise New York's marijuana laws and not even mention the racial justice aspect of New Jersey's.
Well, I mean, I wasn't talking about New Jersey's, and New York has a racial justice aspect. You should watch my interview, which it may be airing today on the Peacock app, with a New York Magazine reporter on the ins and outs of the New York marijuana law.
Aaron from Germany. Letting in even 65,000 refugees is an extremely small number. Germany let in almost 200,000 in 2014, 500,000 in 2015, and 750,000 in 2016. Pretend like the richest country of all time couldn't take in more than 65,000 refugees. Optics aside is just absurd. I agree. And we were just saying before the show, you know, if the Biden administration said like, okay, look, we're going to lift the cap from 15,000, but we're not talking about 65,000. We're talking about several 100,000 to begin with. We just need to figure out an apparatus, so people need to give us time, you know, need to give us 6 months to figure out the apparatus to do that, then fine. You know, but it's just absurd. Leicester City fan, Super League is all favorites and no underdogs allowed. And the final IM of the day. Bullprog, it's Bo like Biden, like what Canadians say, and ner like the end of a word boner. On banner.
Okay.
Whatever.
Is it the-
See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my power